Recording in progress.
All right. Let's deal with this transcript issue, if we may. Let's just start from the beginning, and if you two will, let's get the defendant out here, I guess. All right, let's go ahead and go back on the record and take up the issue of this redactions to the transcript of the interview of Mr. Wiggins. That first issue, well, I guess the best way of doing this would be to let each of you tell me what you've agreed to, and then we'll go from there about any others.
Your Honor, if I may approach,
You may.
this copy I have here has what's been agreed to already redacted.
Right. So then, with this copy, what portions am I going to have to deal with? I guess Mr. Evans can inform me of that. So.
Yes, Your Honor. If it will help the court, I'll just cite page and line numbers.
That would be great.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, first,
for the record, what you're citing is what you and the state have not agreed upon that I need to consider whether it should or should not be redacted from this copy, correct?
that is correct, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
All right, so the first objection the defense has on the current version starts page 5, line 18. It reads from Mr. Wiggins, quote, "I'm a monster," end quote.
And your basis for why that should be excluded is what?
Your Honor, it's under 403, I believe it's prejudicial. It's highly prejudicial.
It is prejudicial. So is your client is confessing to shooting the officer, but that doesn't mean that it's excludable.
Well, I mean, there's a difference. I mean, there's a difference in an admission and a characterization. This isn't an admission per se. And his admission isn't part of it. That's not a question. He admits it throughout the transcript. I mean, it's cumulative, if not that, if not also highly prejudicial. It's not an admission. It's a characterization he's making of himself and his actions.
All right.
I mean, Your Honor,
let's deal with each one of those. We'll let you deal with each one of them, and then I'll hear from the state on each one. So on page 5, line 18 is your first objection, and I note that objection. What's your next one?
next one would be, Your Honor, page 15, line 16. And that is, again, Mr. Wiggins stating, quote, "I'm a monster," end quote.
All right, what page again?
Page 15, line 16.
Okay.
The next.
All right, go ahead.
The next is page 53, beginning with line 2. And I'll give Your Honor a moment to get to the page.
You got it.
All right. Beginning with line 2, Your Honor, the part we are objecting to starts on line 2 with Mr. Wiggins stating, quote, "Please just kill me." And then Agent Neese stating, "I'm sorry." And Mr. Wiggins stating, quote, "Will you just kill me, please? I don't want to live like this," end quote. And we would object to, again, that being presented to the jury.
All right.
defendant's feelings on whether he wants to die or not are not relevant to this portion of the case and would be highly prejudicial. The next would be on page 73. And it's specifically found in line 10. And this is Agent Neese speaking, and the part we would ask that be redacted starts with, quote, "You did treat him like a dog and you put him down," end quote. Your Honor, Agent Neese's statements in this aren't relevant. His characterization of the statements of the defendant are not relevant, and they're highly prejudicial under 403. And it's a hearsay statement. If it's not offered to show its effect on the listener, which it's not being, or to put this in context.
Wouldn't that be applicable to every statement made by the agents when they're interviewing them in a statement like this? Everything they say is a statement made outside of the court.
So I think that, well, I didn't mean to cut Your Honor off. I think the difference is this. And I want to make clear, I've got multiple grounds for the objection, but the way that this typically comes in is that the guidance is it's not hearsay because it's offered to put it in context and show its effect on the person being interrogated, on the defendant, and the back and forth between the conversation. Your Honor, in this instance, that particular line doesn't do that at all. And it's essentially Agent Neese restating in his own words something already said by the defendant. And so, again, I don't think it's relevant. His thoughts or his restatement's not relevant, and I think it also would be a hearsay statement, unlike the others, because it's being offered for a different purpose. The next, Your Honor, would be page 94. And this has got several throughout the page. I'll begin first with line 1. Agent Neese's statement, "Being shot, he did. He screamed. Erica didn't. He screamed. You didn't." And again, this is one, Your Honor, this lines 1 and 2. This is another statement by the agent. The video speaks for itself. The agent wasn't present. The agent is describing his impressions of the video and who did certain things in the video. They're not facts at issue. The video should speak for itself, not the characterization of Agent Neese. Going down line 5 through line 6 of page 94, you quote, Agent Neese says, "You didn't. A man you're so afraid of that you shot. You didn't shock out," end quote. And I'm not really even sure what that line means. But again, it's a restatement by Agent Neese.
In context, what it means is that the agent was talking to him, and he had repeatedly said that he really didn't know what happened, that he just, he was afraid and so forth. And the way I took that when I read this statement last night, and I did read it last night and again this morning, is that he took it, the agent was saying, well, you weren't so shocked out. If you follow it along with what he's saying later, is that your client, Mr. Wiggins, was saying that he was so shocked he didn't realize what was going on, and he gave him a version of events where he, that they're then later telling him, no, you didn't do that. We have it on evidence. We have we know you didn't do that. I think that's typical of cross-exam or interrogation of someone when they're being interrogated, but understand the shock out part means that they don't believe that he shocked out, so he didn't know what he was doing. That's the way I took it. Not that that matters,
Sure.
How I took it versus what you took it, as far as whether it's admissible or not. So.
Well, and again, I wasn't really sure. Your Honor's version makes sense. I'd say either way, the agent's description, impression, opinions about what took place is not relevant. The defendant's statements are, and this doesn't do anything to add to.
That would be true of every confession. I mean, every statement that I've had, a suppression hearing about the agents always confront someone with something, they're allowed to even give them false information, as we all know under the law, to have them, to try to get them to give incriminating evidence as long as they've been advised of their rights. And certainly Mr. Wiggins, before this statement ever began, was thoroughly advised of his rights. So I guess my question is, why, is it just because this is a death penalty case, or do you think in every case that the statements of an agent interrogating someone should be excluded?
I'm not saying that every statement of every agent in every interrogation. I think certain statements should be excluded. I think that the ability of those statements to come in has a limit. And if they're not, because
and I don't disagree that there are
yeah.
some things that would be that way. I don't mean to indicate that I would never ever consider that, but I just wanted to make clear what your position was in this situation.
Yes, Your Honor. The next on page 94 begins at line 16 through line 22, and it's Agent Neese. It says, quote, "So scared that you hunted him down and shot him multiple times and then executed him on the side of the road, a man you were so afraid of, who was still breathing, who still had a gun on his side, that you were so afraid of that you stood over him and you executed him. Look at me, you were afraid of a cop who," end quote. And Your Honor, I mean, this is Mr. Wiggins is being interrogated. His answers matter. That's what has evidentiary value for the jury, or his answers. And he's answered this question. And the detective coming in and providing additional, putting his own spin and saying things, put his own imagery in there, talking about you hunted him down, executed him, whether he was still breathing or not. Those are things that's an opinion. That's an opinion held. That's a characterization about how it went down, and it's opinion held by someone who wasn't there, who respectfully is not I don't think can testify when someone was breathing or not breathing.
Okay. You may. On the record. Go ahead, Mr. Evans, sorry.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. So next one would be on page 95. So beginning with line 3, this is Agent Neese. Quote, "You executed a sergeant with the Dixon County Sheriff's Office, a father," end quote. The next would be beginning line 6 through 8. Quote, "A husband for what? For what? Because you ain't got a driver's license and you might have to go to prison for a little while." Next line would be 10 through 12 on that same page. "What do you think should happen to somebody that done that to Sergeant Daniel Scott Baker?" Your Honor, going down to line 14, Agent Neese, "What do you think should happen?" Line 16, Mr. Wiggins, I think I should be put down like a dirty dog because I never meant to hurt." And that's it on that page. Your Honor, again, this goes beyond the admission of the defendant. It starts talking about the family of the accused, or excuse me, of the victim. It starts talking about the family of the victim in the statement. This goes directly to punishment. There is nothing relevant about asking a defendant at this stage of a trial, but especially at this stage of a trial, what do you think should happen to you for doing this? At this point in time, the juror is not even considering that. is not allowed to consider that at this portion of the trial. And I think it would be highly prejudicial to allow this statement in for that reason. And then the last entry, Your Honor, is page 96. And it's beginning with line 13 and ending with 14. This is, ending with 16. I apologize. This is Agent Neese asking, who was it for? Who is that going to help? His kids? And then Agent Neese says, his wife, question mark. And for this similar reasons as argued earlier, Your Honor, those statements are just not relevant. And it doesn't go to, again, this is an issue of the defendant's statement to police. Those are statements by the agent that really go beyond the scope of him admitting to the facts, admitting to the facts in the incident. So, Your Honor, we'd ask the court to further redact this statement as argued here today, and not let the jury see it in any other form.
All right. You hear from the state.
Your Honor, this is all about context. Starting with page 5, line 18. Mr. Wiggins, without being asked how he characterizes himself, is told by Agent Neese, starting on line 13, and we're going to have a conversation man to man. I'm not going to be disrespectful. I'm going to treat you with the respect you deserve. You're a human being, and that's when he enters in, I'm a monster. It's not in response to a question. It's just Mr. Wiggins trying to garner sympathy by calling himself a monster. It's perfectly legitimate to be in there. There's nothing wrong with it. It needs to stay. Page 15. This is in relation to the co-defendant, Erica Castro-Miles. In line 11, Agent Neese states, all right, so she ran. Did she run off when you told her to? Then Mr. Wiggins says, yeah, she took off running, and I think she might have come back before I was gone, and I told her, I screamed at her, quote, get away from me, I'm a monster. And she turned around and took off running again. That, as the state would characterize, is just simply not true, because in the audio of the body camera, you do not hear Mr. Wiggins saying, I'm a monster, run off. You don't hear it. And as Agent Neese will likely show tomorrow, there's a portion in the body camera where you can see Ms. Castro-Miles' reflection in Sergeant Baker's car as she stands there watching Mr. Wiggins load him into the car. It needs to stay to give the jury context of what Mr. Wiggins is lying about. Page 73.
Well, you skipped page 53. That's
Excuse me.
That was the next one.
Didn't put a mark.
53
You're right.
lines 2 through 6.
Let's give it some context. Let's go back to page 52. Earlier in this back and forth, Mr. Wiggins is claiming to say that Sergeant Baker did not have a pulse. He says, even on page 51, lines 20 to 23, Mr. Wiggins says, I don't know. From that point on, I realized how bad he was. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like a dog. You don't let him suffer. You make sure, you know. I didn't want to man the suffer if it, and here's what I'm talking about. I checked his pulse, and he didn't have one. Agent Neese goes on to talk about essentially questioning him on what his intentions were. Mr. Wiggins says, I don't want him to suffer at line 13 on page 52. Again, line 16 on page 52. But like I said, he didn't have a pulse. He just, nobody suffer. Agent Neese, so can you see we're sitting here talking? I know I'm not judging you, okay? I'm sorry. Just be accurate, okay? And in response to that, please just kill me. I'm sorry, will you just kill me, please? I don't want to live like this. I never meant this to happen. And this is all in response to, without even really any prodding, Agent Neese is starting to call out Mr. Wiggins on things that just simply didn't happen based on the body camera. And he's trying to come up with lies in order to garner sympathy that he did life-saving techniques. He didn't, and the proof will show it. Page 73, line 10 was the next objection. And Agent Neese is discussing exactly what I'm talking about. He was referring to the body camera.
Why is it necessary to put Agent Neese's statements in there? I mean, the portion that you're in, that is the most important is the statements of the defendant from the state's position, and Agent Neese's characterization, repeating what Mr. Wiggins had said, according to the defense, is basically just re-emphasizing something that he said, making his own statement about his opinion rather than anything else. And while I realize that in many cases, the statements that are made by officers during an interrogation are admissible to show the effect they've had on the person that they're interrogating, but in this particular case, why would that be relevant?
Because, Your Honor, it goes all in the whole big picture of this. Agent Neese starts out saying, I saw exactly what happened, after Mr. Wiggins has said earlier that I tried to give him CPR. He makes that claim. It didn't happen. And so Agent Neese is getting to the point here where he's saying, I saw exactly what happened. He's telling him what is in the body cam, calling him out for what the truth is. The truth. I know exactly at what point you decided to pull your gun, at what point that you pulled the trigger for the first time, the second time, the third time, the fourth time. And I know that when you say that you wanted to go over there and check on him, that you did treat him like a dog and you did put him down. And what Agent Neese is referring to is, instead of, as Mr. Wiggins claims, going over, checking his pulse, giving him CPR, no, he didn't do that. He walked over and put 3 shots in his head. And as Mr. Wiggins says, he didn't want him to suffer. You do what you do with the dog. You don't let him suffer. It needs to stay. It gives context to Mr. Wiggins' state of mind and to how he sees this whole story playing out. Page 94 was the next objection, starting on line 1. And in this case, Your Honor, there was several statements that the defense wanted called out, and they were all Agent Neese's statements. So let's read this without Agent Neese saying anything. Let's hear what it sounds like. So she tried. She just shot straight out. She was. It's not, I didn't have it planned, I swear. I was scared he was going to, I swear. These are all self-serving statements that have no context of what they're responding to. So, of course, the defense wants those out. It makes it sound like Mr. Wiggins didn't have any thought in this when all the evidence is pointing to the exact opposite. They're taking out the context of what really happened to make their client sound better. As a matter of fact, on page 92, if we're going to give it some more context, on line 12, which we know in fact is not true, it says, because I thought he was going to shoot, because of what he pulled his pistol and yelled at me from the other side. He had me scared. I'm not going to lie. I was. And then Agent Neese responds, so scared that you hunted him down, so scared that a man who was still breathing life, that you decided to put the gun in your hand. And he goes on to say that he was dead. I swear to God he was. This puts context on all the story, about the politest way I can say it, that Mr. Wiggins is giving to Agent Neese in this interview. And if we take out the back and forth in this section, it takes away all the context of what's actually being said. Again, on page 95, there's, let's see, lines 3, 3 and 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, and 12. I mean, all these lines, if you take out anything that Agent Nee said, again, it's just him spewing these excuses, these trying to talk himself out of the situation. The context is what's so important here, because we're beyond, after the jury will hear this interview after they've seen the video. The prejudicial effect of these statements is out the window at that point. They're going to see what actually happened to Sergeant Daniel Baker and what Mr. Wiggins did. So we can't look at this in the under the microscope of what he said in what specific line. And finally, I believe it's on page 96, and this is all kind of part of the same discussion that they're having. Agent Neese is calling him out for what actually happened in that video that the jury will have seen by the time they hear this interview, to show how Mr. Wiggins is still trying to talk himself out of the situation he put himself in. These are not prejudicial. They're completely admissible. They just need to stay in place so the jury has context of what's going on. And as I said before, the prejudicial effect of the video that they're going to see makes his statements hardly prejudicial at all because of what they'll already see. They need to stay in place for the context so they can see how Mr. Wiggins' motive mind was, what he was trying to say, what he's trying to get out of. And outside of what we've agreed to, everything else needs to stay.
All right, let's deal with them one at a time. Page 5, line 18, statement that's objected to is Mr. Wiggins stating, "I'm a monster." Court finds that that objection should be overruled. It is in response of a spontaneous volunteered statement by Mr. Wiggins after being informed of his rights. In fact, this is a response to Agent Neese saying, "We're going to have a conversation man to man. I'm not going to be disrespectful. I'm going to treat you with the respect you deserve. You're a human being," and then Mr. Wiggins interrupts to say, "I'm a monster." Again, it goes in the whole context in this court's opinion of the entire statement and the statements that later Mr. Wiggins makes in an attempt to what appears to be, at least in the statement, and what appears to be an effort to explain or excuse what he did in these situations. I think it's relevant, and it goes to the issue of his culpability and premeditation in the case as the state contends it should be. So I think it's evidence that should be admitted. On page 15, line 16, it's the same issue, the same statement essentially, again volunteered during the questioning that I think it's page 15, line 16. Throughout this point, Mr. Wiggins maintains, in fact, he maintains throughout the entire interrogation that he didn't mean to do it, that he was scared, and so forth. And when he says, "Scream, get away from me, I'm a monster," and then Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name anyway, she turned and took off running after he screamed at her, "Get away from me, I'm a monster." Again, I think that's relevant. It goes to the issue of the believability of his excuses that he gives during the statement about not being intentional on his part. Pages 53, line 2 through 6, the court is of the opinion that those statements that he says, again, just kill me. I'm sorry, will you just kill me? Please, I don't want to live like this. I never meant for this to happen. And then he goes on to say further down, I never wanted, I didn't want to hurt anybody, nobody. And he repetitively says that. And as General Wyatt says, from the body cam footage, the video footage that's going to be involved in this case, it may tell a completely different story. It goes to his credibility in this court's opinion as to whether he really intended to do it, or as he explains in the statement, or gives a version where he goes over and tries to do chest compressions on Sergeant Baker. And it just seems to me that that goes to his credibility, and for that reason, I think it is relevant. Page 73, line 10, when he states, again, this is Agent Neese, and what he's saying is in response, and it's a typical interrogation technique in which the officer is simply repeating something that the person being interrogated said and brings it back to him. And he had indicated earlier that, you know, he was wanting to put him out of his misery, and like he would do for a dog. That was what he said earlier in the statement. And based upon that, he says, I know that when you say you wanted to go over and check on him, as he had contended, as I've said, that he went over to check on him, check for a pulse, did chest compressions and so forth, that this is an effort to show him that they don't believe him. So while it is a statement of Agent Neese, in my opinion, it's a statement that's justified during an interrogation, so that objection is also omitted, will be admitted, rather. On page 94, line 1, again, in this situation, it's somewhat different. It says, Agent Neese is saying, being shot, he did. He screamed, Erica didn't. He screamed, you didn't. And that's in response to what Mr. Wiggins had been saying up to that point. And again, if the video that we're going to have introduced at this time, you know, it is, to me, there's really no reason to admit this because the video is going to speak for itself, but it does go to his credibility about the events that occurred. On the previous page, he contends only over and over that he shot him the last 2 times because he wanted to make sure he wasn't suffering. But I swore to God he was dead. And then it goes on to say some other things, that he wasn't responding. What was he supposed to respond to? And the agent said, being shot. You know, he did. He screamed. Erica didn't. He screamed. You didn't. And I think that's, again, a line of questioning that goes to the officer questioning Mr. Wiggins's particular version of those events. But we get down to line 16, and where the officer is talking about so scared that you hunted him down and shot him multiple times and executed him on the side of the road. I think that out of an abundance of caution, we should omit Agent Neese's statements in line 16 through, I think we need to omit 16 through 25. And the reason for that is because it is Agent Neese's statements that, in which he's basically, Mr. Wiggins says, I was scared he was going to, and then Agent Neese says, so scared that you hunted him down, shot him multiple times, the man you were so afraid of. But it's a recitation of facts that states Agent Neese's opinion about the nature of this situation, and I think that out of an abundance of caution, that particular line of statements by the agent should be omitted.
Your Honor, to be clear, did you say 25 or 22?
22, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I said 25, but it should be 22, I apologize. So I think we omit 16 through 22. Then on page 90, I believe it's 95, line 6 through 14, again, 95, line 3, I'm sorry. Thank you. 95, line 3, that you executed a sergeant with the Dixon County Sheriff's Office, a father. And then he says, I know I hate myself. And then he goes, a husband for what? Because you ain't got a driver's license, you might go to prison for a little while. And that's line 6 through 14 of those last ones. So again, I think Agent Neese's statement, you executed a sergeant with the Dixon County Sheriff's Office, a father, while maybe actually factually accurate, I think we ought to, in an abundance of caution, omit that because it is just the agent's characterization of it. It's a statement rather than a question, and in that instance, I think that may be appropriate. Now, on line 6 through 14, it talks about a husband for what? Because you ain't got a driver's license, you might go to prison for a little while. Unfortunately, one of the things we have to try to avoid is the idea that the jury is aware of the prior criminal history of Mr. Wiggins and that it may weigh on their guilt or innocence, which is one of the problems we try to keep from them. My fear is that while it's true that someone without a driver's license and driving may end up in prison, it certainly seems to indicate that the reason he was doing that may have been because of a fear of going to prison. And I think there was already an agreement to omit some of the statements he made about having outstanding warrants for him. So my opinion would be that we need to omit lines 6 through 14 as well. I'm sorry, 6. I apologize. I think we need to omit lines 6 through 8. Now, lines 10 through 14, and Mr. Wiggins' response of, actually it's basically page, let me make sure I've got this right. Okay. Lines 6 through 14 was the original issue. I think that Agent Neese statements in line 3 should be omitted, lines 3 and 4. And I think it should be lines 6 through 8 should be omitted. The remainder of the statements on lines 95, including the Sergeant, Agent Neese asking Mr. Wiggins what he thinks should happen, in my opinion, are again admissible and should be admitted, so they will be admitted. That's the portion where he said, "What do you think should happen?" He says, "I think I should be put down like a dirty dog." It may go to sentencing, but what he says is this: "I think I should be put down like a dirty dog because I never meant to hurt. I don't know why I done it. It's like I couldn't. I don't know, man. I never even thought about shooting him. I swear. It's just," and that is the reason that I think that entire sentence should come in, because of the fact that, again, it goes to his credibility about the statement where he's claiming that he didn't intend to. Then 96 lines 13 through 16, is Agent Neese saying, who is it for? Who is that going to adjust? His wife? It's like I couldn't make myself stop. But anyway, the ones about who is it going to help? If you read up above it, it says your mind cleared pretty quickly because you went in survival mode of self-preservation. Mr. Wiggins on line 6, I didn't even, Agent Neese, load him up, hide him, burn him. Mr. Wiggins, it wasn't even me. Agent Neese, to get rid of your fingerprints. Mr. Wiggins, it wasn't even me. Agent Neese, who is it for? Who is that going to help? His kids? Mr. Wiggins, his wife. Mr. Wiggins, it was like I couldn't make myself stop. I don't know. I kept telling myself no. So I think, number one, the questions that Mr. Neese, Agent Neese are asking in that instance are not really related to what he's saying. In other words, he's saying, it wasn't even me. He wasn't saying that he didn't mean to do it. He just says it wasn't even me. It was like, if I understand correctly, he couldn't stop himself or whatever. But those statements by Agent Neese, I do think, while certainly are reflective of Agent Neese's concern for the family and the child of Sergeant Baker, and certainly this court understands that. But again, those seem to me to be probably not really relevant to the answers that are being given, and for that reason, those statements should be excluded. So lines 13 through 16 should be excluded as well. Any questions about my ruling?
Judge, on page 96, is it just lines 13 through 16 that you're excluding?
Lines 13, I want to make sure lines 13 through 16 on page 96 were the only ones that were excluded. Yeah. I had gone through this transcript 2 times, last night and again this morning, trying to make sure of what might be objectionable and what should come out. I know you two, both sides have now agreed to some of those changes being made. My concern was I wanted to make sure that everything I've done that I flagged with the assistance of my capital case attorney, Ms. Jones, I want to make sure all of that's been addressed. So what I'd like to do is to have her go through, compare what we've done with what you've done with my ruling, and just make sure before we leave today that it's there's nothing else that needs to be addressed. All right, having ruled on all of those issues, are we ready for the jury to come back? All right, let's bring the jury in. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. I think we told you that we had some repairs to be done. I would like to blame the repairman for all of the delay, but it's really because partially his fault, but partially it's because I took up a matter outside of your presence that needed to be dealt with, so that hopefully it will make things go more smoothly the rest of the day and tomorrow. So, all right, gentlemen, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Laura Bowes.
Judge, the witness is not working yet. It went off air again.
Okay, we need to admit the... Is it working now? All right. All right, we are ready now to call your witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Special Agent Laura Bowes.
Stand right here, raise your right hand, repeat the clerk.
Do you solemnly swear to affirm the testimony you give in this case be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Agent Bose.
Good afternoon.
If you would please state your full name and spell your last name for the court reporter.
Laura Bose. My last name is spelled B-O-O-S.
And Agent Bose, how are you currently employed?
I'm employed at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. I work in the Nashville Crime Lab, and I work in the Forensic Biology Unit.
Okay. And Agent Bose, I'm going to go over a couple different things. If I could approach the witness, Your Honor.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Agent Bose, I'm handing you a copy. Do you recognize what this document is?
Yes, this is a copy of my resume.
Okay. And if you would please just basically go over what your educational background is.
Yes, I have basically a BA degree in natural sciences and in biology. That's from Columbia College in Columbia, Missouri. I also have a master's degree in forensic science from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And I also have a PhD in microbiology, also from UAB.
Okay. And have you conducted laboratory experiments and published professional papers?
Yes.
Okay. And have you been qualified before to testify in the courts of Tennessee as an expert in any areas?
Yes, I have.
And what areas have you been qualified in?
Forensic biology, and sometimes it was referred to as serology DNA.
Okay. Your Honor, we would make Special Agent Bose's CV the next exhibit.
All right, Mark, so Exhibit 174.
Yes, sir. And we would tender her as an expert in forensic biology and DNA serology.
All right, she will be tendered as also an expert witness in that field.
All right. Now, Agent Bose, could you please just describe what your duties include at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation?
At the crime lab, again, I work in the forensic biology unit, so I test evidence for typically bodily fluids, blood, semen, or saliva, and I do DNA typing. I'm also a member of the violent crime response team, so I do go out to crime scenes and work those typically with a group of other scientists, and we will identify, collect, preserve, and then bring back to the lab evidence from that scene. I write official reports, and I issue those to the folks who have submitted evidence and also to the DA's office. So we do a number of different tasks there, some more than others, but for the most part, I work in the laboratory and I do work in the forensic biology unit. So mostly I'm analyzing evidence at the lab and running DNA.
Okay. Now, Agent Bose, I'm going to ask you a couple different questions about how you go about your general duties in analyzing evidence. Do you have to receive a request for examination from an agent in order to do your job?
Typically, yes.
Okay. And were you working as part of the VCRT team on May the 30th, 2018?
Yes.
And were you assigned out to Dixon County to assist?
Yes.
And could you please explain for the jury how you got notification and what your role was coming out to Dixon County with VCRT?
I was notified by our regional lab supervisor that we did have a crime scene we needed to respond to. So the team gathers itself and then goes to the address as indicated. And when we get there, we meet up with the people already on scene who can give us more information and kind of guide us as to what we need to do there, what the facts of the case are, that type of information. And then we proceed to go ahead and process the scene.
Okay. Now, is your job twofold? Sometimes you're in the field collecting evidence, and then you're also back at the lab analyzing evidence.
Yes, I do both of those jobs.
Okay. And could you explain to the jury where you responded to in Dixon County on May the 30th, 2018?
We actually met up at a command point along Bird Road. That is where we had our briefing and collected statement of facts and background information. And then between Bird Road and South Fork Bear Creek, there's a creek in that area, is where the actual scene was. So we were briefed up on the road where it was convenient for everybody to gather, but then the scene itself was off-road.
Okay. For clarification, were you responding to the scene that had the police interceptor and Daniel Baker's body?
Yes.
And could you please explain what you did at that scene?
Basically, we, as I stated earlier, our job there is to identify, collect, preserve evidence, whatever that evidence may be. So, and just general documentation. So that is what, as a group, we do. So we photograph, we might take video, we might take scan station data, and basically we record the scene. We also, again, are going to try and determine what is evidence, what is necessary to collect, and bring back to the lab for testing. And so that is our main duty there, is to process that scene as a whole, from documentation to transport back to the laboratory, anything that might need further addressing or anything of that nature where it may need to be tested, but we need to go ahead and collect it just in case. So those are our main duties.
Okay. And were you actually the agent that completed the official crime scene report for the Bird Road for the VCRT team?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to approach the witness again, Your Honor.
You might.
Agent, I'm handing you a document. Do you recognize what that document is?
Yes, this appears to be a copy of that report.
Okay. We'll wait just a second. I think we'll have it up on the screen, and I'll ask you to walk through it and explain it to the jury. Do you have a copy of it yourself?
I do.
All right. Now, Agent Bose, what is listed, what you're viewing on the screen, is that the same thing as your official crime scene report that I had previously handed you?
Yes.
Okay. And if you would please, could you please just walk through the information that's on this document?
So up at the top, we have the agent who is going to get a copy of the report once it is released, and the agency involved, that would be TBI, the agency case number, the date of issue, and then a laboratory case number. So this is given both an agency case number, sometimes it's TBI, sometimes it's another agency, but we also give it an individual laboratory number as well. So that's kind of what is at the top area there. And then we have listed subjects, Erica Castro Miles and Stephen Joshua Wiggins, and victim listed as Daniel Baker. And then we have a narrative which describes the arrival, the nature of the investigation we have been called to, as well as the time that we arrived and who we were briefed by once we arrived there. And just simply what took place there is the next area. It doesn't go into point by point, but it just gives an overview of how we process the scene. And then I have listed the VCRT or Violent Crime Response Team members that were present. So all of their names are accounted for there, and their initials, so that if you were to look at any of their paperwork, you would know who wrote that paperwork. I have at the bottom there is the evidence collected at the scene by us, and all of those items are things that we have identified and recorded, some collected, some not, but that is all the work that was processed at the scene, and then most of it was brought back to the lab.
And if we could scroll down, there are initials that are listed onto the side of those columns. What do those initials mean? It says collected by.
Collected by would be the person who actually made sure that the packaging was sealed and that item was actually collected as it is stated on the outside of the bag. So those initials correspond then to the agents that are listed there under BCRT members.
And you all are out there, are you all working together? Sometimes there's two of you looking at the same piece of evidence and watching it get collected. Would that be true?
Yes.
Okay. And then if you scroll down, please. There are some extra notes at the bottom about a card being collected.
Yes, so I wasn't able to fit it in the description slot there that there was a keys and card from Daniel Baker that was collected. So I wanted to further describe that card. And the card collected for that exhibit was a social security card for Erica Castro Miles.
And to be clear, you have lab exhibit numbers, item number, and scene marker. Those numbers are specific for your VCRT crime scene, is that correct? Like marker number 1 is not a universal marker number 1 for the entire investigation? That was just
No, that's just for us, and the scene marker number, item number, and then lab exhibit number. So between VCRT at the scene and then would be the combination of those 3 particular numbers.
Your Honor, we'd like to move the official crime scene report as exhibit number 175.
All right.
Now, Agent Bose, as you have 2 roles in this crime scene, my understanding is that you collected some evidence and then you also tested this evidence for serology and DNA. Is that correct?
Some of it, yes.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by discussing your items that you collected yourself, and then we will go through the forensic biology reports. Did you make forensic biology reports and DNA reports for specific items submitted in this case?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as TBI exhibit number 43. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what is that?
This is a bag that contains swabs from the crime scene, and they actually are swabs from the victim's clothing. And these were collected by myself and Agent Manfredi, and I know that because of the TBI tape and my initials and our independent laboratory number and item number, exhibit number.
And we'll talk a little bit about when a piece of evidence goes into the TBI and there's an evidence number there's an exhibit number on there. In fact, that one says exhibit 43, is that correct?
Yes.
And that is that an internal laboratory number?
Yes, and it is the one actually also referenced on the BCRT report, so that corresponds to that piece of evidence once it's been submitted to the lab.
Okay. And you said that you and Agent Manfredi were you working together to collect these swabs, and were you present for them?
Yes, I collected some of the swabs that are in here, and then she collected one of the packages as well. So together we collected this item.
Okay. And you sealed them up and submitted them as evidence to
Yes.
the TBI?
Yes.
Connor, we would move that as the next exhibit, number 176.
All right, 176.
I'm going to hand you another package that is labeled TBI, lab number 96, I believe? 95, I'm sorry.
95.
95. And can you explain where you collected that item?
Yes, this was collected from the front driver's floorboard of the officer's vehicle. And this was actually, it looks like collected by Agent Heather Hammond, but I did submit it to evidence.
Okay. Were you there and aware that this is the cell phone that
Yes.
came from
Yes.
there? All right. And was that sealed and submitted
Yes.
for testing? And that was a silver cell phone from the floorboard of the Ford Police Interceptor?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, we move that as the next exhibit, 177. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as lab number 97. Can you identify what that is?
This is a DF1 oil container from the Ford.
And is that the oil container from the passenger rear seat of the police interceptor?
Yes,
Okay, and did you collect that?
yes.
Your Honor, we would move that in as exhibit number 178.
178.
And agent, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as lab number 103. And can you identify what that item is?
Yes, this is the two-way radio that was collected from the Ford Police Interceptor.
Okay. And did you collect that?
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, we move that in as the next exhibit 179.
179.
And agent, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as exhibit 105 for the lab. Can you identify what that is?
Yes, it's a wallet from the back seat of the Ford Police Interceptor.
Okay. We'll move that as the next exhibit 180. And I'm going to hand you what's been marked as lab number 122A. 122. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes, this is a holster from the Ford Police Interceptor.
Okay.
And it's from the front passenger seat.
Okay. And did you collect that?
Yes.
All right. We'll move that in as the next exhibit, Your Honor, number 181. Now, Agent Bose, I know that we just moved in several pieces of evidence that you collected out there at the Ford Police Interceptor. Did you also analyze DNA and serology in this case and submit 2 finalized reports?
I did.
Okay. Before we go over the reports, if you would please, just explain a little bit about the DNA comparison analysis and what that is and how you basically go about doing that.
Sure. So DNA basically is the blueprint for life, and it's contained in our cells, and it is unique to an individual. So that's why it becomes forensically relevant. When I have a sample for testing, first I isolate the DNA from it, get it by itself. Next, I'm going to determine how much DNA, if any, is present. And assuming that there's DNA present, I'm then going to target areas of that DNA, and I'm going to copy those and then analyze them. Once those areas are analyzed, what I end up with is basically a series of numbers which collectively become known as that sample's forensic DNA profile. I can use that profile and compare it to other samples or profiles in the case, as well as to known DNA standards. So I can make comparisons to unknown samples, I can make comparisons to known samples, but it's all about looking at that series of numbers specific for that sample. And again, every individual has a unique forensic DNA profile, with the exception of identical twins. So this is why using DNA becomes extremely important in these types of cases, because we can determine the source of a profile if we have the appropriate comparison samples to make. So we try and provide that information by going through that process. But the profile itself is just a series of numbers, and I do a side-by-side comparison.
Is there a specific threshold to get a contributor? Can you talk a little bit about a minor and a major contributor profile?
Sure. On my report, there are several of these results which might indicate a major or minor profile. A major profile is simply just to indicate that that individual or individuals contributed more of the DNA material for that sample. A minor contributor obviously would just be less than that. So in general terms, that's what those two definitions should mean to you. It doesn't really, it's not really about the amount necessarily, but more about the ratio of the two, usually.
Okay. Thank you. And as we talked about before, did you produce a forensic biology report dated 7/10/2018 in this case?
Yes,
Okay. And do you have a copy of that with you?
yes.
Okay. I have a copy here in case you need to refer to it, but I'm going to start asking you some questions about your DNA analysis on specific items in this case. Agent Bose, can you look up on the screen here? Do you recognize what this document is?
Yes, that's my official forensic biology report dated 7/10/2018.
Okay. And if we could scroll down a little bit, I'll ask you to just describe what the top part of the document means, and then we'll talk a little bit about the exhibits, and then I'm going to talk to you about your analysis of some of them.
Yes, so it's very similar to the official crime scene report. At the top, we're going to have the submitting agency information as well as the laboratory case number. The subject and victim involved, or subjects and victims, are listed as well at the top. And then what we get into are the exhibits that have been submitted for this particular case. And on the right-hand side, you also see a date received and time received for those items, and that is giving you the chain of custody for when it was submitted to the TBI crime lab. So that's what the right-hand side here is about.
Okay. Now, we have a panel down at the bottom that says exhibits, and it starts having numbers starting at 3 in this case, -A. Could you explain what that numbering means?
That's just a unique identifier that TBI assigns to that particular item. So all of the items submitted will get their own exhibit number. It's a TBI laboratory exhibit number.
Okay. And this is a fairly lengthy document. It's a 14-page report. If we could scroll down a little bit so that we can show there's lots of items that were submitted for testing. In this case, we're going to talk to you about certain specific ones.
Yes.
If you could keep scrolling down, please. All right. Where it starts to get to the results on page 3.
Yes.
Now, all of the documentation at the top of that were items that were submitted, is that correct?
Yes.
And then the results, is that where all of your data comes in for the comparison analysis?
Yes, that's where I'm going to be placing any information having to do with what I have tested, what the results are, and perhaps what my interpretation might be. So that will all be in that section.
Okay, so do the numbers at the bottom there that say results numbers, that corresponds to the item that was tested above, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and in this case, were you given 3 known standards to compare these items with?
Yes, I was.
And whose standards were you given?
I received standards from Erica Castro-Miles, Daniel Baker, and then Stephen Wiggins.
Okay, so are those the 3 individuals that you are comparing these pieces of evidence to?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'm going to hand you, while that's up there, because we're going to talk about this in a minute, what has previously been marked in this trial as Exhibit 83, but is lab number 11, which is a door access card. Do you recognize that item?
Yes,
And is that an item that you tested?
it is.
And when you received that item, was it sealed properly?
Yes,
And did you do some DNA analysis on that?
I did.
Okay. And what was your result for number 11A, the key card?
So for 11A, I had identified a stain on it, and I swabbed that, tested it, and my test indicated the presence of blood and the presence of human hemoglobin. And when I did DNA testing on that particular stain, the profile matched Daniel Baker.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about, you said that you tested a specific stain on there.
Yes.
Could you explain a little bit about testing, why you tested that portion? with the stain? Was it a visible stain?
It was a visible stain, and I was looking for anything that might potentially be blood or some other type of biological material that I could generate a DNA profile from.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that exhibit back. And now I'm handing you what in this trial has been previously marked and entered in as exhibit number 82, which is the lab number 12. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes, it's a button that was submitted from the crime scene.
And did you do DNA testing on that?
I did. I tested again a stain from this item. My tests indicated the presence of blood and human hemoglobin. Excuse me, that test was not performed. There was not enough samples. So my test just indicated the presence of blood. And the profile that I obtained was a mixture from at least 2 individuals that included at least 1 male, and the major contributor profile matched Daniel Baker. The minor contributor profile was inconclusive.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to hand you what has been in this trial marked as exhibit number 76, which is going to be lab number 15, which should be a red blood stain from number 10. Marker number 10?
Yes, so this item 15A, my tests indicated the presence of blood and also human hemoglobin, and the profile from this item matched Daniel Baker.
Okay. And I'm going to hand you what's been marked in this trial as exhibit number 78, which was lab number 13 and is marker number 8 at Sam Vineyard.
Yes. So for this item, my tests indicated the presence of blood and human hemoglobin, and the profile I obtained from this item matched Daniel Baker.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to hand you what in this trial has been marked previously as exhibit number 77, and it is lab exhibit 16A, which is marker number 11 from Sam Vineyard Road.
Yes. For this item 16A, my tests indicated the presence of blood and human hemoglobin, and the DNA profile from this swab matched Daniel Baker.
Thank you. I'm handing you in this trial what's been exhibit number 79, lab number 17, and that will be marker number 12 at Sam Vineyard Road.
Yes, so for 17A, my tests indicated the presence of blood and also indicated human hemoglobin, and the DNA profile from this swab matched Daniel Baker.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to hand you what's been marked in this trial as exhibit number 75 and lab number 19, which was marker number 14 in Sam Vineyard Road.
For 19A, my
Yes.
tests indicated the presence of blood and human hemoglobin, and the DNA profile that I obtained matched Daniel Baker.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do you have exhibit number 85? Agent Bose, I'm handing you what in this trial has been marked as exhibit number 85, which is item number 18 from marker number 13 at Sam Vineyard Road.
For 18A, my tests indicated the presence of blood and human hemoglobin, and the DNA profile I obtained matched Daniel Baker.
All right. Thank you. And Agent, I'm going to hand you what in this trial has been marked as exhibit number 87, crime scene marker 17, lab number 22. Broken sunglasses.
For 22A, I swabbed the nose and the earpiece areas of this particular exhibit, and the profile I obtained from that sample matched Daniel Baker.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, can I see exhibit number 80, please? Agent Bose, this will be item number 23A. We can probably just talk about that. These would be sunglasses, a sunglass lens from Sam Vineyard Road. Did you do any testing on that?
I did not.
Okay.
It was, the item itself was reserved for latent print examination.
Okay. And can you explain why you reserved it for a latent print examination?
I didn't see anything on it such as a reddish brown stain that I might test for blood, and since it was such a smooth area, the latent print examiner and I, who would be working this together, kind of decided this particular exhibit was just better suited for her examination than anything I could do with it.
All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, I don't need that item. Can I have item number 176, the swabs from Daniel Baker's clothing? Thank you. Now, Agent Bose, I'm going to hand you a package that you've previously identified here in court today as exhibit number 176, which is exhibit number 43, which were swabs from Daniel Baker's clothing. And I'd like to take a little while and have you explain what your findings were for exhibit number 43A.
So for 43A, there's actually, let's see, 5 different sets of swabs that I did DNA testing on. So do you want me to just go ahead and go
Yes,
through
please.
each of them? Okay. So swabs from the back of the shirt. The DNA profile that I obtained was consistent with a mixture of at least 2 individuals, including at least 1 male. And the major contributor profile was consistent with Daniel Baker. The minor contributor profile was inconclusive for those swabs. Next, I worked swabs from the back of the pants. The DNA profile I obtained was consistent with a mixture of at least 2 individuals, including at least 1 male. And the major contributor profile was consistent with Daniel Baker. The minor contributor profile for that particular set of swabs was also inconclusive. Next, I had swabs from the front of the pants. And the DNA profile I obtained was consistent with a mixture of at least 3 individuals, including at least 1 male. The major contributor profile was consistent with a mixture of 2 individuals. And assuming that Daniel Baker was present, since it was his clothing, the deduced contributor was consistent with Stephen Wiggins.
Now, Agent, I'm going to stop you right there and have you explain that there were basically 2 major contributor profiles for the swab on the front of the pants. Is that correct?
So from the front of the pants, the major contributor was actually a mixture of 2 individuals. So yes, there were 2 individuals associated with the major component or contributor.
But you did identify Stephen Wiggins as having the DNA profile that was consistent with his DNA being on Sergeant Baker's pants.
Yes.
Now, when you took a swab of these pants, because you're the one that did this, could you explain the process of how you went ahead and swabbed these pants?
The swab from the front of the pants actually was swabbed
Okay.
by Agent Manfredi, but all the other ones I did. But the process is going to be similar. We're going to take sterile swabs and get those wet with water, and then basically lightly just swab that surface area. I chose to do these swabs at the scene so that any type of touch DNA or skin cells that might be on his person didn't get lost as he was being removed from the vehicle or transported to the medical examiner's office, that type of activity. So he was swabbed at the scene for that reason. It's very delicate evidence sometimes, and I thought it would just be best to do it there at the scene. But the process is the same for all of these swabs. Just some cotton swabs, some water, and then just honestly just swabbing that area. We did try and avoid any areas that had reddish brown stains. We were looking more for touch type DNA on these samples.
Okay. And if you could continue on for the swabs from the right boot and the left boot, which I think are 4 and 5 for.
Yes, so swabs from the right boot, the DNA profile obtained was consistent with a mixture from at least 3 individuals, including at least 1 male. The major contributor profile was consistent with Daniel Baker, and the minor contributor profile was inconclusive.
Okay. All right, thank you. And now I'm going to hand you what has been marked in this trial as exhibit number 160, which is a high point model JHP weapon, and that would be item number 50A on your profile list. I'm not going to ask you to open it, but did you do a DNA analysis on that weapon?
Yes, do you want me to continue with the swabs from the left boot first?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
It's okay, it's okay. Let me go ahead and finish that group of swabs. So the DNA profile I obtained from the swabs from the left boot of Daniel Baker was consistent with a mixture of at least 3 individuals, including at least 1 male, and the major contributor on that particular sample also was Daniel Baker, and the minor contributor was inconclusive. Okay. So that is all of the information from those swabs. I do believe that we also skipped over the minor contributor profile from the swab from the front of the pants. That was inconclusive, just to clarify.
Okay. So out of the swabbing of Sergeant Baker's clothing, you did find the DNA of Stephen Wiggins?
Yes.
Now, Agent, I got a little ahead of myself there, and I handed you what in this trial was item number 160, which is exhibit 50A in the lab, a high point pistol. Did you do DNA testing for that weapon?
Yes, I did.
And could you please explain, I believe you did pistol and magazine, and how you went about doing that and what your results were?
Yes, so my test did not indicate the presence of blood on this item. And for the pistol, I swabbed the grip, the trigger, and the slide pull areas. And the DNA profile I obtained was consistent with Stephen Wiggins. For the magazine, that item was also swabbed for DNA testing, and I swabbed the loading area and the bottom area of that item. The profile obtained was consistent with a mixture of at least 2 individuals, including at least 1 male. And the major contributor profile was consistent with Stephen Wiggins. The minor contributor profile was inconclusive.
All right, thank you, Agent. I believe you also tested what in the lab number was 51A, a Glock 33 pistol.
Yes.
Did you find any DNA profiling on that pistol?
I was able to only develop a limited DNA profile consistent with at least one male, but it was inconclusive and it was negative also for the presence of blood.
All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, if I could see Exhibit 177, the cell phone parts. Thank you. And Agent Bose, I'm going to hand you what you've previously identified, have been moved into evidence in this trial, is item number 177, which were cell phone parts from the driver's side of the Ford, which is lab number 95.
So for 95A, there was a silver cell phone back, and I swabbed the non-stained edge area, including the buttons from that item. And I obtained a limited DNA profile consistent with the mixture of at least 2 individuals, including at least 1 male, but it was inconclusive. A stain I tested from that item indicated the presence of blood and human hemoglobin, and the DNA profile I obtained was consistent with the mixture of at least 2 individuals, including at least 1 male, and the major contributor profile matched Stephen Wiggins. The minor contributor was inconclusive.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to ask you a question about that. When somebody has a stain, it was positive for the presumptive test for blood, so presumably, was that Mr. Stephen Wiggins' blood on the phone? Can you tell from this testing?
Because it was a mixture, I cannot say with certainty one or both people didn't contribute blood. I can't really make that distinction.
Okay. But
So-
you can be certain that Stephen Wiggins' DNA was on the cell phone found on the floorboard of the Ford Explorer?
Yes, it was.
Okay. If you could go down and continue on to the rechargeable battery.
Yes, for the battery, I tested a stain from that item. My test indicated the presence of blood and human hemoglobin, and the DNA profile I obtained from that stain matched Stephen Wiggins. There was an additional marker as part of that profile, but that is inconclusive. It's very limited information. So the only profile that I developed matched Stephen Wiggins.
Okay. Thank you. And Madam Clerk, if I could see exhibit number 178. It's the big one. And Agent Bose, I'm going to hand you what you've also moved in today is exhibit number 178, which is lab number 97, which is a oil container, a DFI oil container from the back seat of the police interceptor. And did you test that?
I tested a stain on this item, and that particular stain, my tests indicated the presence of blood and human hemoglobin, and the DNA profile I obtained matched Daniel Baker.
Okay. And was that the only profile that you obtained on that bottle?
No, that was just from the stain. I did also test the cap area, and the DNA profile also matched Daniel Baker.
Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk, if I could see exhibit number 179. Thank you. And Agent Bose, I'm going to hand you what in this trial has been marked as exhibit number 179 that you previously moved in, which is in the Ford Police Interceptor, a 2-way radio that was in the front.
For 103A, I tested a stain from that item, and my testing indicated the presence of blood and human hemoglobin, and the profile matched Daniel Baker. I also swabbed the non-stained areas for DNA testing, and for that sample, the DNA profile was consistent with a mixture of 2 individuals. The major contributor profile matched Daniel Baker, and the minor contributor profile was consistent with Stephen Wiggins.
So you found Stephen Wiggins' DNA on the police radio that was in the front of Daniel Baker's patrol car, is that correct?
Yes.
And Agent Bose, I'm going to hand you what in this trial has been marked as 181, which was a holster, and it's also lab number 122. Can you explain where you collected that holster?
That was collected from the passenger side front seat of the police interceptor.
Okay. And was that conclusive for any DNA?
It was negative for blood, and there was only a limited profile that I obtained. It was consistent with 2 individuals, at least 1 male, but it was inconclusive for comparison purposes.
All right, thank you. Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to move a copy of the official forensic biology report dated 7/10/2018 into evidence.
All right, that would be 182, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Counsel approach the bench.
Now, Agent, before we go on, I'm going to ask you a question because we've had certain terms that have been used during this. And if you're not familiar with DNA testing, they can be kind of tricky. Could you please describe what an inconclusive result is?
Basically, that just means I either don't have enough information or it's so low level that I can't make an effective comparison to any standard. So I just have to say it's inconclusive. I can't include anybody, I can't exclude anybody. It's kind of just off the table. I have to acknowledge it's there, but there's really nothing I can do with it.
So you can't render a professional judgment based on standards that you've been given?
No, I cannot.
Now, Agent, you did a secondary report on 7/19/2018 as well in this case, is that correct?
Yes.
And in that, you tested a specific weapon. I'm going to approach with what in this trial has been listed as exhibit number 120, which is a 9mm Glock that was found under the hood of the police interceptor. And that will be, I'm looking at the lab number. lab number 133.
Yes.
Okay, if we could pull up that. Agent, if you could look at the screen, if you could, Mr. Etheridge, if you could scroll up so we can read the top of that document, please. Agent, do you recognize what this document is?
Yes.
And what is it?
It's a copy of my official forensic biology report from 7/19/2018.
Okay, and if we could scroll down a little bit, there are known standards listed, and then the exhibits that were listed there. Exhibit number 133A, the Glock pistol. Is that what you had in the box there?
Yes,
Okay. And did you forensically test that?
I did.
All right. And if you would, this is fairly lengthy, if you would just go ahead and explain your testing methodology on this and your results.
Yes, so I tested some of these samples are going to refer to stains, some are overall swabs. I'm just trying to get a complete sampling of this particular weapon. So I've indicated which are stains and which are overalls. So I will go through all of those. The first one was a stain from the bottom of the grip, and my test indicated the presence of blood, and the DNA profile I obtained was consistent with a mixture of at least 2 individuals, including at least 1 male, and the major contributor profile matched Daniel Baker. The minor contributor profile was inconclusive. There was a stain from the middle of the grip. It tested positive for the presence of blood, and the DNA profile I obtained was consistent with a mixture of at least 3 individuals, including at least 1 male, and the major contributor profile was consistent with a mixture of 2 individuals. Stephen Wiggins and Daniel Baker were consistent with being contributors to this major mixture profile.
Now, Agent, I'm going to stop you and ask you, where on a weapon is the middle grip?
So it was a stain that was, if you're looking at the grip, would be central located. So it's not the whole grip, but a stain on one side in the middle area.
Okay. And as we previously discussed, can you tell whose blood it is, or just the fact that there's 2 DNA profiles there?
I can tell you it's blood. I can tell you whose DNA is part of it, but whether the blood comes from one of them, both of them, I cannot tell you that.
How can,
Blood was present and both of their DNA is there.
how can DNA also be deposited on something if it's not just by blood?
It could be from your skin cells. You could sneeze on it. Any of those types of activities also. So even though I've tested the stain, there could be other types of DNA there besides blood type DNA.
So it could be a mixture of skin cells and blood together, and you can't tell the difference between whose blood and whose skin is. Is that correct?
I really can't in this particular example.
Thank you. If you could continue on.
Okay. So next there was a stain from the right side of the slide. It tested positive for the presence of blood, and the DNA profile I obtained matched Daniel Baker. I took an overall swab of the grip area. Tests indicated the presence of blood, and the DNA profile that I obtained was consistent with a mixture of at least 3 individuals, including at least 1 male, and the major contributor profile was consistent with a mixture of 2 individuals. Stephen Wiggins and Daniel Baker were consistent with being contributors to this major mixture profile. The minor contributor profile was inconclusive. There's an overall swab of the slide area. Tests indicated the presence of blood, and the DNA profile that I obtained was a mixture of 2 individuals. Stephen Wiggins and Daniel Baker were consistent with being contributors to this mixture profile. and overall swabs of the trigger area and the trigger guard area. My testing did not indicate the presence of blood. The profile obtained was consistent with the mixture of two individuals. Stephen Wiggins and Daniel Baker were consistent with being contributors to that mixture profile. Overall swabs of the attached light area, my testing did not indicate the presence of blood. And the limited DNA profile I obtained was consistent with a mixture of at least 3 individuals, including at least 1 male. An interpretation of that profile was inconclusive. Overall swabs from the base plate of the magazine, my test indicated the presence of blood. And the DNA profile that I obtained was consistent with a mixture of at least 3 individuals, including at least 1 male. The major contributor profile matched Daniel Baker, and the minor contributor profile was inconclusive. Overall swabs from the case and loading area of the magazine, my test did not indicate the presence of blood, and the profile I obtained matched Daniel Baker. I also took swabs from inside the barrel and tested those, and they were negative for the presence of blood.
Thank you, Agent. So from all of that, basically, you found the DNA of Stephen Wiggins and Daniel Baker on the stain in the middle grip, the overall swabs of the grip area, and the overall swabs of the trigger guard area. Is that correct?
Yes.
So Stephen Wiggins' DNA was on the gun, the duty weapon that was found under the hood of the police interceptor.
Yes.
And Your Honor, I would like to move a copy of this forensic report in.
That would be July 19th, 2018 forensic report. Mark it as Exhibit 183.
We'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Mr. Evans?
Good afternoon, Dr. Buss. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing well. It's good to see you again. So I want to go back to what's been marked for the trial as Exhibit 182, which is your report, I believe, of 7/10/18.
Yes.
So specifically, what's marked in the report is Exhibit 50A, which I believe is the high-point pistol.
Yes.
So when you tested the high-point pistol, it says here that you tested the pistol itself, the grip, trigger, slide pull areas, correct?
Grip, trigger, and slide pull areas, yes.
And on that one, you were able to find DNA profile consistent with Stephen Wiggins.
Yes.
And then underneath there, it says that you tested the magazine.
Yes.
And I believe that you were explaining that when you test the magazine, you swab the, is it the outside of the magazine, the portion that would be inside the pistol itself?
It would be the loading area, which would be considered inside if it were inserted, and then the bottom area, so also an exposed area.
Okay. And I want to make sure I understand, this test here, this is not one where there was blood, correct?
Correct.
This is, I think you referred to as touch DNA?
Or some other source.
Or some-
The item itself, the pistol tested negative for blood, so I did not see any staining on that, so some other source would be fair.
And you say some other source, I think you said earlier that can be from skin cells, right? From a person coming into contact with that portion of the firearm that you swabbed, correct?
Sure.
And it says here that the DNA profile obtained was consistent with a mixture of at least 2 individuals, at least 1 male. So can you explain that? How do you know it's consistent with a mixture of at least 2 individuals?
Well, when I explained earlier about all of that series of numbers and the combination of numbers, a certain number of those numbers for each of the markers that I target makes sense for one individual. If there's more than that, it indicates to me that there's potentially more than one person. And depending on how many of those different numbers are part of that profile, that will help me establish sort of the minimum number of people who could be there. So, and we also, when we're doing that target for those areas, those specific areas, we look at gender markers. So I'm able to say at least one male, sometimes even when the profile itself is inconclusive for comparison purposes. So that's how I kind of derived that statement.
Okay. So if I understand you, what you're saying is there was DNA found, so at least two individuals came into contact with that, their DNA came into contact with that magazine in the spots that you swabbed, and one of them could have been a female. Is that fair?
It's fair. I only know that one was male. There was more than one, so I can make no assessment about the other. It could be. I don't know.
Now, one of the other items was item 81A, and that's the number listed on your report, which was the holster that was recovered from the driver's side of the Saturn. I believe it's on page 9 of your report, top of the page.
So 81A, yes, was a holster from the driver's side rear seat. Yes.
And can you explain your finding as to that?
I obtained a limited DNA profile consistent with a mixture of at least two individuals, again, including at least one male. But because the profile was so limited, interpretation was deemed to be inconclusive. So it's another one of those examples of where I obtained information, but it just was not enough information to make an effective comparison to anybody.
And if I'm understanding how you've just explained this, is it's very similar as to the other one. That other person that came into contact with a holster could have potentially been a female, correct?
Could have been. I just don't know.
Now, you also did several swabs, because you had a control buccal swab from Erica Castro Miles, is that correct?
Yes.
And her DNA actually, you actually were able to match her DNA or find her DNA on several things in the vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes.
Including, I believe, I think it was the steering wheel of the car, if I remember right.
Which exhibit are you looking at?
That'd still be on 182. I'm trying to find the exact number.
Are you looking at 87A? Page 9.
Page 9, let me get back there. Yes, ma'am. Swab some steering wheel. Thank you for finding that for me.
It's a long report. What was your question?
That Ms. Castro Miles her DNA was actually on the found on the steering wheel from swabs you took from that area?
Yes,
Okay. And you also found her DNA on several, I think, maybe drink bottles that
Yes.
were in the car, correct?
yes,
All right, thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you, Dr. Bose.
yes.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Specifically, Agent Bose, I'll go back to Mr. Evans asked you about what was been marked as lab number 81A, a holster. The description of that holster was that it was recovered from the Saturn, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay. And then he asked you specific questions about exhibit number 087A. Do you have that document? About swabs from the steering wheel. And that would be the steering wheel from the Saturn, is that correct?
yes.
Okay. And specifically, what was the result from the swab from the steering wheel of the Saturn, number 2?
2 individuals, Stephen Wiggins and Erica Castro Miles, were consistent with being contributors to that mixture profile.
So on the steering wheel of the Saturn, both Stephen Wiggins and Erica Castro Miles' DNA was found.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Recross? Thank you, Agent. You may sit down.
Thank you.
Appreciate your consent. Well, I think this might be an appropriate time for us to stretch our legs and take an afternoon recess. Now, the state has how many additional witnesses today? 4. All right. Everybody okay to continue going a little later? All right, let's take a 15-minute recess then.
All right. Court is in recess.
There's so many of them, like, oh my gosh.
It was after 81.
Oh, well, numbers are bad for me.
I said,